Hello, my name is Jose Alonso from Southeastern University with Criminal Law 4403, and I'm here to present on the Twinkie defense using Dan White's informational trial. The preceding slides will cover the case briefing, what are the facts, what was the defense, why was it a standout, was it effective at trial, credible defense, and conclusion. Case briefing. We have Daniel James White, date of birth September 2nd, 1946, deceased October 21st, 1985, convicted of voluntary manslaughter, 2 counts, victims George Mosconi and Harvey Milk, a criminal penalty of 7 years and 8 months imprisonment. Daniel James White was born on September 22nd, 1946, and died on October 21st, 1984. Mr. White was found guilty of 2 counts of voluntary manslaughter by the victims of George Mosconi and Harvey Milk. He faced a criminal sentence of 7 years and 8 months in prison. Mr. White assassinated 2 of his colleagues in San Francisco, Mayor George Mosconi and Supervisor Harvey Milk, on November 27, 1978, at City Hall. According to the trial briefing, Dan White resigned from the Board of Supervisors and requested that Mosconi reappointed him. Based on the findings, the mayor decided against it, and Mr. White on November 27th loaded his gun and headed to City Hall while bypassing the front entrance and climbed through a basement window and went to see the mayor. What are the facts? Former police officer, a former firefighter, proper professional training, November 27, 1978, visits mayor at San Francisco City Hall with a gun and 10 extra bullets. Before the murder, Mr. White resigned from his employment as a supervisor to pursue a private business venture. He wanted his previous job back when it failed to obtain support from the local police and fire departments. Mayor Mosconi had previously appointed a liberal supervisor, Mr. Milk, to fill the vacant position. According to Groene C. 1984, the jurors learned that White reloaded his gun after shooting Mosconi, although it was not clear if he reloaded immediately, as police are said to do by training, or if it was a few moments later to prepare to shoot Milk. Mr. White's testimony alone suggested he shot both men. Later in detail to understanding was gained through a posting showing that Mr. White begged in addition to being in a depressive mood from a former colleague of Mr. White, and testimony of a local police department police inspector. What was the defense? Diminished capacity, kill without malice or premeditation, symptomized diet, Twinkies and Coca-Cola, and conviction of voluntary manslaughter. The fundamental refutation of Mr. White's team's central contention is that his mental state contributed to the 2 murders. He was unable to plan the killings in City Hall because of his sadness, which was why it was provided. According to Cornell Law School 2023, a testifying psychiatric pointed out that White's consumption of sugary foods such as Twinkies could lead to diminished capacity, enabling a defendant like Mr. White to demonstrate then that he lacked the competence to kill without malice or premeditation and the mental condition necessary for such a conviction alone. White's underlying depression was more than likely symptomized by a shift in diet to Twinkies and Coca-Cola. The conviction was for voluntary manslaughter rather than first-degree murder due to the absence of both. Was it a standout? Politics, jury, Twinkies, and the White Night Riot. The case stood out because of the pressure of the city of San Francisco was facing at the time of the court ruled that politics should not be discussed during the trial, mentioning that Mosconi's information could emerge, which did not want to hurt his family in front of the public. Mentioning Milk's lifestyle might have quickly led the jury toward Mr. White. Despite this, the jury continued to accept that the murder resulted from a malnourished diet. The fact that the trial was so peculiar and that Twinkies was mentioned as a snack item triggered a murderous mood. The importance of Mr. White's impaired capacity was challenged to defend for Mr. White under California law. The White Night Riot was a political march for which San Francisco was unprepared after the verdict's conclusion that voluntary murder was wrong. Was it effective trial? Effective, defense team, mental state, and elimination of diminished capacity. Although the case had a different resolution involving diet, the defense team's case was quite persuasive, putting many of the neighborhood residents on edge. It was up to the jury to decide if Mr. White, an all American youngster who murdered two political officials, was guilty, which was equally vital to the case and jury selection. Reviewing the information that showed Mr. White's poor mental health was solely attributable to his diet of junk food led to a very chemical reaction in his brain, according to the University of Minnesota Library's 2015. In the aftermath of this highly publicized trial, California passed legislation eliminating the diminished capacity defense and limiting the admissibility of evidence of diminished capacity only to sentencing proceedings, California Penal Code 2010. The term Twinkie defense has been used when referring to a particular ridiculous medical defense. The term was an all-encompassing phrase that which such a strong defense justification absolved a murder. Credible defense. Attorney Douglas Schmidt, psychiatrist Martin Blinder, jury, middle class members, opening statement, and depression. Credible defense would point to defense attorney Douglas Schmidt's work in such a landmark case that established the standard for all subsequent cases in the state of California. The opening statement alone was respectful of the jury because of the speaker knew them and compared their social standing to that of Mr. White. Only respectable middle class members of the community made up the jury. Attorney Schmidt asserts that people with good histories speak directly to juries without pausing, and he addresses the jury as a wonderful, claiming that murder just doesn't happen, but Mr. White was actually mentally sick, extending his discussion of how, why, and how depression align can play a role in situations like Mr. White. Martin Blinder, a psychiatrist, has been added to the list of witnesses to provide a thorough examination of behavioral changes brought on by manic depression and a drastic shift in diet. Conclusion. Dan White got away with first-degree murder because of the Twinkie defense. It gives an intriguing verdict on the degree of political interference and how the jury was proposed. It was understood that despite having a brief political career, Harvey Milk was an iconic figure in San Francisco at the time. Mr. Milk gained notoriety for becoming the first openly gay official to be chosen in the history of the United States, and Mr. White's actions alone may have caused such a hate crime in the morning. San Francisco was not prepared for the White Night riot, despite Mr. White being let free with a minor charge and credit for time already served on May 21st, 1979. Numerous supporters of Mayor George Moscone and Harvey Milk took to the streets to protest. 3 hours later, officers used tear gas to end the riot after it destroyed a dozen police cars and the municipal hall. At that point, the mob dissipated. After serving 5 years of 7-year sentence, Mr. White was released and returned to San Francisco, but he eventually committed suicide. The references that provided great insight. If you wish to grasp more information on this unusual case can be found and have been provided by Cornell Law School, Twinkie Defense, Gorney C. 1984, The Legacy of Dan White, the University of Minnesota Library 6.1, The Insanity Defense, Criminal Law. And if you'd like to take a look at the documentary, ABC 7 Originals has an excellent insight with live terminal feedback. Thank you for allowing me to provide my presentation.